So welcome to Real Life and Real Estate. I'm Nickie Robbs, and I'm a real estate agent in Tacoma and Puyallup, Washington. And today my guest is Kristine. Kristine chose me to help sell vacant land. And it was a very long process, but it was a very interesting process. So welcome, Kristine.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, let's just get started with what was the trigger that helped you and your family decide now's the time to sell this vacant land?
The trigger was that the property taxes suddenly jumped by more than 100%.
Mhm.
So they slightly more than doubled one year, a couple of years ago. And I was quite shocked. And at first I thought it must be some kind of mistake. And so I went online to do some research on recent sales and current property values to try to put together a case, to appeal to the county auditor and say, I think you guys goofed here because how can this be? And I discovered why the property taxes had suddenly doubled because after many years, at least like 15 years, I think, of the properties in that area, at least vacant land, especially of considerable size, had just been languishing in the basement in terms of values for a couple of the reasons that I will mention in a moment. Suddenly, I could see on the county auditor website that at least two or three properties of fairly considerable size, 20 acres or more, had sold within the past year for reasonably decent prices. And so the values they had sold for indicated to me that our property, which was 41 acres, was, valued, could be valued substantially higher than had been the case for a long time. And essentially what happened was that after the whole global financial meltdown in 2008, 2009, the property values in that area, which was down in Thurston County near the town of Yelm, just didn't recover.
Yeah.
Partly because it's way out, away from Seattle and other places that recovered much more quickly, but partly because a decision was made, a typical environmental protection decision, to protect certain land that was home to a little critter called the Mazama pocket gopher. And when that happened, because it was a new thing, it took a long time for the permitting process to be established.
Yeah.
So the county had certain environmental protection processes and the federal government has certain environmental protection processes. And it took, I forget, over a decade, 12 years or more, for the county to get the federal government's approval for their environmental conservation process. Mm-hmm. So anybody who wanted to do anything in terms of developing vacant, undeveloped land out there would have to get approval from the county and then get approval from the federal government. That's long, expensive, uncertain. People are faced with investing thousands of dollars and maybe getting to the end of the road and having somebody turn thumbs down on what they want to do. And that really depressed the property values. Yeah. And so finally, I think what happened was it became apparent that the county and the federal government were getting pretty close to coming to an agreement, and that the feds would probably approve the county's process. And once, people who were in the know saw that handwriting on the wall, they started being willing to pay more for properties like that. And then suddenly, I think this was, I forget, 2021 or something like that, two or three properties of undeveloped land of significant size had sold for what was suddenly much more reasonable prices, reasonable from the seller's standpoint.
Right, because the rest of Pierce County, we were running out of land, available vacant land. People weren't motivated to sell vacant land at the time, and so all the vacant land was going for
Right.
astronomical prices, just like homes. People were paying much higher than what we expected. And sometimes
Right.
getting worse. Then all those people just moved down to Thurston County, and now let's do the same thing here.
It's possible that another factor was that after COVID hit and people discovered that they could successfully work remotely to a considerable extent, people suddenly broadened their horizons. I mean,
Oh,
my
definitely.
brother and
Yeah.
sister-in-law moved clear from Seattle to Savannah, Georgia, after they both discovered, and they still both effectively work in Seattle/Bellevue.
Yeah.
And they live almost 100% of the time now in Savannah, Georgia. And so I think this was a transformative thing in terms of making people willing to go farther away from the metropolitan area to build a home or to live in general. One thing that I've observed in the past, probably 40 years of my life is that what happens in this boom and bust cycle is that Seattle/King County and probably Bellevue, whatever, they recover fairly quickly because of the tremendous demand for housing up there. And it takes a long time for Pierce County property values to increase. And then once Pierce County property values finally start to increase, it shoots the moon. I mean, I don't know how dialed in you were to this back in, the like 2005, 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
But property values before the global financial meltdown were just, after years of languishing compared to King County, were just shooting the moon. I mean, people literally started being reluctant to put a home or whatever on the market because they thought, well, it's doubled in the past 2 years. I mean, if I hang on to it for another year or two, it may double again.
Yeah.
And once that happens, it's just about, reach the apex because expectations are such that's just not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Peter Lynch, who was a famous investment guru of the previous generation, said trees don't grow to the sky. They tend to grow really fast and then they slow down. Mm-hmm. And then they eventually, if they kept growing at the same rate that they started out at for the first 20, 30, 40 years, they'd be as tall as Mount Rainier eventually. And they don't. It's everything in life operates that way.
There is a cap.
So anyway.
Yeah. So property taxes basically doubled. It was such a surprise. And then you discovered this might be the time where we can remove ourselves.
Yeah. So, my parents had bought the land originally. They had hoped to build a home on it and sort of have their own private nature reserve out there. That was kind of their dream. But they sort of left it too long to do that. They were a bit too old by the time they got that idea, and they just didn't have enough years left to get that accomplished. The land is about an hour's drive away from where our longtime family home is, and on the outskirts of Tacoma. And so 2 hours round trip, basically. And originally, it was zoned as farmland because about a third or so of the property is pasture, basically, and the rest of it is forest. There's a wetland area in the middle of the forest. So this is kind of like perfect for my mother, who was an avid bird watcher. I mean, you've got all the different, environments there for various different kinds of bird life. There is a rise in the middle of the property that could put you up where you could get a nice view of Mount Rainier, especially if you cut down a few trees. You could potentially have some of it selectively logged and make some money from that to help you, or sell some of the trees that you cut down to build a home, which might help you pay for your construction. And so my father actually tried to do some farming there. He tried to raise some goats, some sort of specialty breed of cattle, and it just practically killed him. He was
Oh,
commuting back and forth on almost a daily basis, especially in the wintertime,
yeah.
because he needed to be sure that he thawed out the cattle's, drinking trough or whatever. And it's a wild area. I mean, herds of elk have
Yeah.
been coming in there even up until current times,
Yeah.
and grazing in there. And there are coyotes and all kinds of things. And so at one point, my father had this little herd of goats, and they all got killed by coyotes or whatever. And the other trying to maintain the cattle was just such a hard time for him,
It's kind of
commuting two
work.
hours a day every day. And
Yeah.
then if the weather got bad and there was snow or ice or whatever, it
Mhm.
was just a bad scene. He had to give that up after, I don't know, a couple of years of
Yeah.
trying. And eventually, the county picked up on the fact that it wasn't actually being maintained as a farm anymore. And so they bumped it up to regular property tax rates.
Ah.
And so that was a shock to the system.
Mhm.
And this happened right before my mother passed away in 2006. And then in 2010, my dad wound up having a dramatic decline in health and wound up in skilled nursing for the last 3 years of his life. And so this, property was just sitting there with nothing being done. My siblings and I were basically just, paying the property taxes every year and dealing with more pressing problems.
Yeah.
And then when the property value collapsed, it actually wasn't bad in terms of cost because the
Mhm.
property taxes dropped dramatically because the values declined so much. And so it was sort of like my four siblings and I had our own little private nature reserve down there. And we didn't mind spending that kind of money to just sort of feel like our elk and our birds
Yes.
and our other wildlife were down there, living off the
Right.
fat of the land, on our not too terribly expensive investment.
That's like
But there
having your
were,
own walking trails, your own little baby hikes, a great place for the dogs to roam if you had dogs, and it was secluded and very low maintenance.
yeah. And so the only other stressors really were that there is a toxic weed called tansy ragwort that appears every once in a while in people's pastures or whatever. And if that happens, and state inspectors go around checking places where there's grassland, because it can be devastating if people have cattle or whatever and they're out there grazing and that kills them.
Yeah.
And so, if a state inspector discovers that you have tansy ragwort growing among your grasses, um, you have to get out there right away and pull it all, which is a big job, especially if you have 10 or 15 acres of pasture like we did down there. And once, I forget, way back in the 90s, this happened. And at the time, practically all my friends had teenage kids.
Yeah.
And so, I just recruited a friend of mine and got a bunch of the teenagers from that group to go down there with us, and I paid them to go out there and pull all the tansy ragwort. But now, I'm over 70, and my friends don't have teenage kids anymore, and it would be a real challenge to come up with a way to, I could sure hire, whoever, find somebody to take some people down there and pull it all, but that was something that weighed on my mind. So yeah, we talked about the issue of the tansy ragwort and the
Yeah.
distance from my home and everything, and so and the property taxes. And so a couple other things that were motivators to sell are that there's also an issue of liability,
Mhm.
potential liability, which I honestly didn't think about for years because I had way too many other things in my mind. But we went for a long time, over a decade, without having any liability insurance on that property.
Mm.
So if anybody had gotten onto that property and had something bad happen to them, that could have been a real disaster for us financially.
Yeah.
And it didn't really seriously cross my mind until we put the house or the property on the market. And then I realized people are going to go out there and tromp around to look at it, to consider whether to buy it. And so now I really need to get a liability insurance policy on there. So
Yeah.
I did do that. But it's something that anybody who wants to buy vacant land as potentially an investment and just hang on to it for years really needs to contemplate.
Yeah.
So, the cost of the property taxes and the potential cost of insurance. And if you own a home, maybe that vacant land could be added to your homeowner's policy. But in our case, after my parents passed away, we just had this little family trust, and we had sold the family home to one of my siblings. And so that vacant property out there was the only asset like that we owned anymore. So we really needed to insure that separately.
Yeah.
And it wasn't terribly expensive once I finally got in gear and did it, but it is a significant expense to add on top of the property taxes that should be done to protect your financial future, basically.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll mention is that there's also just the issue of crime. And so we had a situation where the road that accessed the property had gotten so grown up with blackberries on both sides of the entryway that people were coming in there and parking their car in that little entryway in between the rows of blackberry bushes. And so it was hidden so that the neighbors around there couldn't see it. And then people would go maybe break in or steal things from the neighboring properties. So we were contacted we had a wonderful neighbor down there that whole time for decades who just was our salvation on many occasions. And they have a neighborhood association down there. And so some people who knew that he was friend with a friend of ours contacted him, and he contacted me, and he said the neighbors are wondering whether something could be done to block the access to be able to drive in there into that entryway by the farm gate between the blackberries. And so while I was pondering what to do about it, one of the proactive neighbors down there, the farmers have big equipment. So somebody just went and picked up a few big boulders and went over there and parked them alongside the road themselves.
There you go.
And so that was fine.
Yeah.
The problem took care of itself, basically.
Yeah.
But that is an issue when you have a vacant property that's, distant from where you are, and you can't really keep an eye on it. And things can happen.
Yes.
So.
And in our neck of the woods, our current problem with people who don't have consistent housing is that they will find a place to camp semi-permanently. And if that's on your land, it is a whole can of worms.
Absolutely. And that issue just unfortunately keeps getting worse and worse all the time. So it was, one of those basically half dozen reasons why we just decided, the evidence now is piling up for choosing this as the time to sell that property. And hopefully somebody else achieve the kind of dream that my parents had, but never, were too old by the time they seriously.
Yeah, it sure is. And I think we got really lucky in finding the perfect buyer for that land.
Oh, absolutely.
And I really hope they get to come on and tell their story and share how this land solved their problem too. For you, selling the land was a huge solving problems, taking things off the plate that needed to go. And for them, it was, we're solving problems here. We're adding things to the plate that they wanted added to their plate. So both sides are pretty awesome. So selling the land solved a bunch of these problems. And you had quite a team of people that made this happen. It actually took an extra long time to sell this land, which isn't terribly unusual, but it was unusual for different reasons for us. And so over the whole year that it took to sell the land, do you remember how many people contributed to making this happen?
Oh gosh. I mean, principally, it was you and
Mhm.
the man that you invited to come out and just view the property and discuss it with the two of us, who is an expert in developing these kinds of properties for
Yeah.
um, not for commercial ventures typically, I don't think, but just for, people who want beautiful homes and whatnot.
Mhm.
And that was just a godsend for me because he, after years and years and years of the property values being so depressed out there, I mean, my mind, even though I knew values had gone up, my mind was kind of still in the basement in terms of what
Mhm.
I thought we could reach for. And he really opened my eyes and enabled me to think about it kind of on a whole new level.
Yeah, he
And
really
so,
expanded the dream, didn't he? He made us realize how valuable land
absolutely.
was from a different perspective. We were thinking, oh, it's just land.
Right,
And then this is Mike Nichols with Lot Launcher.
right.
That's what he does. He prepares vacant land for building. And he told us about all the people that he would be happy to serve and bring to this land. And oh, it could look like this, and it could look like this, and this would be such a great place to put a house. And now we're like, oh, we can market this completely differently because he opened our eyes to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it really reminded me of something that my father told me decades ago, which I've always found to be, wise advice. He said, whatever it is that you own, whether it's a business or a home or anything you've built or whatever, you people, it's just human nature. You always have a tendency to see the flaws,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you know them all intimately. And so they tend to devalue things in your mind. It's kind of like the same kind of thing why people tend to take their spouse for granted or, whatever, or they're,
Yeah.
get to the point where they're always unhappy with their kids or, because, we all see the flaws in the things that we're closest to. And then somebody else can come along and look at that relationship or that home or that land or whatever with new eyes, and see all the good things and the possibilities. And so in a case like this, where you're trying to value, put a value on something,
Mhm.
um, you really need those fresh eyes and you need something to cast some vision, some positive vision,
Yeah.
um, and give you a better perspective and a
Yeah.
more hopeful, perspective.
Yeah. Do you remember when we needed the well found? First of all, we knew it was out there, but didn't exactly know where. We needed the well found
Right.
and then uh, certified and sealed and all that stuff. Do you remember which company was able to do that?
Well, I didn't actually hire them.
Oh,
The
that's right. The buyer
buyers,
hired them. Okay.
yeah, the buyers found them. I'd have to look it up,
Oh,
but
I'll have to
yeah,
ask them.
if you interview the buyer, you'll have to ask
I will
her. I
definitely
don't
ask them.
remember
They
the
were
name
a
of the
big
company. It was
part of,
down in Olympia.
okay.
Yeah, it was down in Olympia somewhere, and yeah, we were very concerned about that because the well had been put in 30 years earlier and
Yeah.
it had been used for like a couple of years when my father was trying to maintain a farm out there, and then it had just been sitting there unused for all those years since then. And so it was hugely a relief to find from the inspector that the seal had not broken, because apparently if the
Exactly.
seal had broken and potentially got contaminated, you'd virtually have to drill a new well.
Right.
So some of the machinery, I guess, had to be replaced or repaired or whatever, but
Mhm.
um, that turned out to not be really bad news story.
Yeah.
And of course, the buyers, one of the reasons they love this property is that they own a business right there in Yelm, just a few
Mm.
miles down the road. This enables them to potentially build a home and move much closer to their business from where they currently live.
Yeah.
And they have animals, and they've already put like horses and maybe some of their other animals on that property. So they absolutely had to have a well. They need to be able to water
Yeah.
the animals even long before they build a home there.
Hmm. Yeah, that was Fantastic. I know obviously we had a title company involved making sure that there's no surprises along with the property. And, they did their job quickly and easily because your parents had done the work before then and nothing had happened. So that was easy. And then we had a series of lenders that the buyers were working through, and that wasn't really on our side of the transaction. But then at the end, we ended up doing seller financing. So can you tell us a little bit about the decision to go with carrying that loan on your side of things and your lawyer and people that helped you get to that end?
Yes, the fact that it took us so long, like over a year, to finally put this deal together and close on the sale, is attributable to the fact that the buyers originally wanted us as the sellers, our little family trust with me and my four siblings, to finance to give them a contract where they would make a down payment and then make monthly payments to us until they were able to secure some other type of like bank financing or whatever that would encompass both the remaining balance of the loan to buy the property and the whatever it's going to cost them to build the home they want to, or other things out there. And I just absolutely dismissed that out of hand because of the potential risk I saw. My parents had done the seller financing on a property they had sold years ago, and the buyers, disappeared or stopped making payments or whatever. And my parents had to go through the repossession process and sell it again, and yada yada. And I would say, for the benefit of anybody else looking at something like this, I would say one major mistake that I made in the course of all this was I so quickly dismissed that out of hand that I didn't even closely look at the proposal from the buyers. And I belatedly discovered, like a year later, when the buyers had jumped through all kinds of hoops trying to, get other financing to buy this property, that the buyers had offered to make what was effectively about a 33% down payment
Very helpful
on the property, which would have made me think differently about the whole idea. Might have still not convinced me at that point, because I would have just preferred that they get financing somewhere else. But that really would have made me sit up and take notice. These people are serious. They're not going to give us a third, down payment and then just turn around and walk away for no good reason.
Yeah.
And that amount of money is so significant that even if they did stop making payments at some point, we would have gotten plenty of money out of it to be able to hire a lawyer, pay lawyers, or do whatever we needed to do to go through the process of recapturing, or title or whatever. And so, by the time we had kept saying, I had kept saying no, no, no to their proposal of having us do an owner-seller contract on this for a year, we had fallen in love with their vision for the property. We really, really, really did not want to sell it to somebody who was going to go in there and cut down all the trees and chop it all up and put in a bunch of homes. And I mean, that was honestly our biggest motivation, was to avoid that happening. And so then when they just came up against it, where they realized they would have to invest so much money into the permitting process and everything else before they could get some financial institution to underwrite what they wanted to do, that risk was just tens of thousands of dollars, and then potentially have it all not work and end up without the land even after all that. And so we certainly understood that they just couldn't, bite that bullet.
It thinks that the permitting process is so expensive and so lengthy that these aren't questions we could have answered 9 months earlier.
No, especially because of the environmental consideration that I already mentioned. And so then I just started seriously thinking about, um, what would this entail if we actually did this? And then I finally belatedly noticed that they were offering to make such a big down payment proportionally
Yeah.
that my eyes opened and I said, okay. And then I went online and did some research and discovered that, um, well, there are two things that helped. One was that we had sold our family home, our family trust had sold our family home after the second of my parents passed away, to one of my sisters
Mhm.
on an owner financed contract. So, and all those documents had been prepared by our lawyers at the time.
Yeah.
And so I sort of had um, a prototype of, all the kinds of documents that it would take to do that. Sorry, that's my mother's bird clock that just went off there. If you heard that, uh, that's the whatever the bird of the hour is. I think that's actually an oriole, which we don't hear around here. It's more
Oh.
eastern. But anyway, one of the things I keep here in our family home to remind me of her. But anyway, so then I went online and discovered that there's like, I forget, an association of lawyers or something
Mhm.
that has all of these standard legal documents posted online. And
Yeah.
because I already knew which documents they were, because of the previous transaction we had done with my sister to sell the family home, I
Mhm.
was able to download current versions of all those different documents, the seller
Yeah.
contract and the promissory note and the deed of trust and the this and the that. There's like, I forget, half a dozen documents you
Yeah.
need in order to be able to do this kind of thing. And I simply plugged in all the necessary data to fit this particular transaction. And then because I did all that work and then just sent it to our lawyer and said, would you please look this over and let me know if you see any issues with this that I should address?
Yeah.
The legal bill to do that was I forget, $300 or something. I mean,
Oh, that's
I had
incredible.
assumed I had
Yeah.
assumed from the start that this would cost $2,000 or $3,000 at a minimum, if we were to, you know,
If you were to
do a
walk in there with
telethon.
no idea of what you needed, except I just need someone to make it happen, and instead you had done 90% of the homework and they're just double checking your
Right,
work.
right.
Yeah.
And so, and it turned out there were no issues. He pointed out one thing that he thought I might want to think about whether we really wanted to do it that way or that
Yeah.
I could consider adding something that I ended up deciding we didn't need to do. And that was it. Other than that, he just basically
Yeah.
put his blessing on all the documents I had prepared.
Wow.
And so it worked.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we've gone through, wow, a long story of the land has become expensive. It's become a lot of work. It's no longer serving the family very well. We're going to sell it, and now the buyer is making payments directly to you and not a bank, and so that's solving all kinds of problems. The buyers, and they're pursuing their dreams, and it's solving problems for them too. Do you have any advice for anyone else who's just thinking, man, this land isn't serving us anymore?
One thing that really helped me, and this of course would be different for every county, so you'd have to figure out uh, whether the particular county that your land is in has this sort of resource, but it's typically the county assessor who, the county auditor has legal documents and so forth. The county assessor typically has all the property records that relate to
Mhm.
valuing properties for taxes and so forth. And so I went on to, this happened to be in Thurston County, and I went on to the Thurston County assessor's website and looked to see what resources they had there. And just going in through the page that addressed our specific property and had the just legal description and the valuation and the property tax history and yada yada, there was a tab there that enabled me to just pull up a list of all the property sales within a certain distance of our property, within, I forget how far it went back, the past few years.
Yeah.
And they had different classifications for different types of property. At first, it was kind of overwhelming. I thought, well, this isn't going to do me any good. It's too much information and values all over the map. And I'd have to look up every one of these properties and see, was this a house on a half an acre or what was this?
Right.
And then I realized they had a column where they have a category of property. And so I could filter just for the properties that were undeveloped land.
There you go.
And that was far fewer properties, and a lot of undeveloped land out there is at least a few acres or more. Mm-hmm. And so fairly quickly, I was able to just select, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 properties going back the past couple of years, and drill down on their property description quickly to see how big was this. And so I looked at any property that was 20 acres or more. And in a few cases, they even looked like a 5-acre property. You sort of have to adjust that because, they're tend to, when you have, 8 times that size of property, it's not necessarily 8 times the value, but at least it gives you an idea.
Yeah.
And I would look at, how close was this, and there's just a lot of resources now. Of course, you can look at the Google satellite photos and sort of see, has this all been clear cut? Is this all grassland? Is this all forest? And there's not much all forest out there anymore. I mean, just in the past 30 years since my parents bought that property, most of the significant areas of forest around there have been clear cut.
Yeah.
And so you could sort of start trying to compare apples to apples. So that was a tremendous help to me. And of course, you also did your research on property values because you have the real estate tools too. But it was very helpful for me to both have the information I was getting from you and to be able to see those specific properties on the county assessor's website and exactly, when those sales were transacted, kind of ponder how those compared to our property and put that into the equation.
Yes. Awesome.
Other than that, you just have to have a rock star real estate agent. That's the key.
Right. And then finding the right buyer. I know we were nervous for a little bit, like we don't want this to go to a developer. We really want it to go to someone who's going to love the land, keep it, if possible, not put up 400 homes on 40 acres. And we got lucky right off the bat because that's exactly who we attracted. We attracted not a developer, but family that just wanted space. And so for anyone else who's thinking of selling vacant land, think long and hard about what you want this to look like. And if you need to be picky about the buyer, or if it's more about the money, because those are two very different options. And so we were really dialed in on the type of buyer we wanted, and that affected our pricing as well. So,
right.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting today, Kristine. I can't wait to share this out there and make sure that other people who have vacant land and don't know what to do with it know that they will always have options.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for being with us today. I hope that if you're thinking of selling or buying vacant land or homes in Pierce County and Thurston County, you'd give me a call, and my email is in the notes. So thank you very much.